Hi, this is Shimon Lazarov at Shimon Lazarov on Twitter.
And this is Alex Chizik at Mr. EBITDA, and welcome to the Hardcore Finance Podcast.
Today we're going to discuss the lessons we learned from 2020 and their implications on 2021.
It'll be interesting to talk about government regulation, the pandemic, the inflation, the stock market, Bitcoin versus regular investments, and what we can do with this in the future.
So, Alex, what do you think is one of the most important lessons that you learned in 2020?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it's never assume. That's probably my big lesson. And, let's just call out the elephant in the room. Obviously, we've had a pandemic. And maybe my big never assume lesson is never assume that things are going to be as they are. Never assume that the underlying theses or the underlying assumptions are going to stay in the same way. So, for example, who knew that the world would come crashing down and come hitting a brick wall, almost instantaneously? In every recession, you've had a gradual decrease and you kind of have seen it coming. You would never believe in 2019 if somebody told you, hey, in March of 2020, the world will literally come to a grinding halt. And the forecasting that recession, the literal 0 to whatever, -15, -30% drop, and then the U, the V, the W, whatever the other rebound that we talked about was, it was extremely hard to forecast, extremely hard to think through. So never assume, I guess, that the status quo is going to keep on being the status quo. So another way, plan for the black swan. What about you, Shimon?
Yeah, I mean, I really love the never assume meme because I can take it to another direction, which is like we had all these economic models that had solid relationships between things. For example, the Laffer curve, right? Like there's a connection between unemployment and inflation, right? Like everybody said that once you have high unemployment, right, you cannot have inflation. Once you have low unemployment and then you print money, it creates inflation. This completely broke. In 2020, we saw record levels of unemployment. The government printed a lot of money. It was like 30-something% of the money supply just in 1 year. And then we didn't see any inflation in consumer prices. We saw inflation in asset prices. We saw inflation in, stock markets. But usually when people worry, when I was in business school and people were worrying about inflation, I don't think they were worrying about inflation of the stock market. They were worrying about like the grocery store prices being more expensive. Now, yes, we had this crazy pandemic. And you have all these macro people saying, oh yeah, it's actually the deflation from the virus plus the money printing, and that's why you didn't have the inflation. But the relationship between inflation and employment broke. So never assume that the models that you thought were predictive will continue to be predictive in the future. So I really like that. What did I learn? I'll tell you what I learned, that it's more of a question than a lesson. Why does the government have to collect taxes if it can just print the money that it wants to give people? The easy answer, the facile answer to that is like, oh yeah, you collect taxes just to take them from the rich. But still, like you can do other things, to redistribute wealth. It's just very interesting. Why do deficits matter if the government can just monetize its debt? I guess that's a question we'll have to answer in 2021.
I think so, but it's an interesting point that you bring up, and I think there's 2 points to this. One is, what does it matter if you're the U.S. or if you're any other country in the world? And I do have this thesis that as the U.S., because we are the biggest economy, and my macro thesis is that it's the top economy and everyone else. It doesn't matter if you're 2 or 3, really, just because there's you have a stable, safe top economy where no matter what happens really to the dollar or what happens to our political situation to an extent, economic situation, people still, there's a flight to safety. There's a flight back to the US in terms of investments. And so the US is a bit unique. I think the other the other part of your question, which is very interesting, is that, you're right. Why do you have to collect taxes if you can print money away? But what most people don't think about is that, in essence, any government intervention into a free market is a tax. So when we talk about, Trump versus Biden, obviously 2020 saw the major US election. And we talked about, well, Trump is going to keep taxes low and Biden will increase taxes. Yes, to a point, visible taxes, right? Personal income taxes. But putting in tariffs, for example, or starting a trade war is a tax. Printing money for whatever project you want is a tax. So all of, an astute investor or astute economist or astute market observer has to think through all of these implications and think through the fact that all of these government interventions, printing money, creating tariffs, are actually a tax, right? And so this is something that most people miss, and many other podcasts that talk about finance and investing completely miss. And it's I think a big disservice to the listeners.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point that every government intervention in the free market is a tax. And, just like you could raise taxes and put the money to good use, right? Like you could raise taxes and then build better infrastructure that would pay for itself. Or you could raise taxes and put the money to really bad use, in which case, like, it's wasted money. It's the same with government interventions. And we had many episodes discussing those things, where a government intervention could potentially be good, but could potentially be very bad. And sometimes it's very hard to tell because of short-term effects and long-term effects. And I think that's another thing that I learned, which is there can be a parallel economy where government intervention is not possible. And this parallel economy is Bitcoin. And if you had told me that like 20 years ago, that someone would be able to build a parallel economy that's outside of the purview of governments, I would have thought that you're crazy.
So it's an interesting point about Bitcoin, and you and I are both fans, and you and I both invest. I do think that, just like with any nascent technology or innovation, you have ups and downs and you have these hype cycles. And so, Bitcoin has kind of gone through its hype cycle. In 2017, it was overhyped. A lot of retail investors, a lot of Google search terms. There was a bubble in 2017, went up in price, then crashed down. Now it's coming back up in price again. It's becoming a lot more mature. It's interesting to me to see the two different sides of things. And one thing that I'm beginning to be very cautious about, and I'm saying this as a fan of Bitcoin and as a believer of what it can bring, is that, and I'm sure you and I, by the way, will have many episodes about this, is what I see from the Bitcoin camp has morphed from being an interesting tech and an amazing innovation into like a fervor pitch and almost like a religious zealot type of following of, you must believe this and nothing else. And what I hear from all of the other Bitcoin podcasts, and I think this is where you and I are trying to be different, is Bitcoin is amazing because, and then dive into, a half an hour or 40-minute history of the world. Every single fucking one goes into the history of the world, of mankind, and what happened in Austrian
But
colonies.
Alex, the rye stones, they were using rye stones for money in the Yap Islands.
Exactly.
Not important.
But do you know what I mean? Do you feel that too? And it's a little bit like we're in a current reality where we're not in a world where Bitcoin and crypto is fully taken over. And for better or for worse, Bitcoin and crypto need the current economic system in order to survive because you need to move in and out of fiat in order to actually consume. Bitcoin is not a great consumable money or usable money right now. You can't go to your local 7-Eleven or mom and pop shop and give them Bitcoin. And so it becomes almost a disservice to the potential when things are getting pushed so hard and so religiously. And every single time you go back to the world and gold standard versus not gold standard and yada yada yada, it's literally, it's like, have we learned nothing from this election? When you're a zealot about something, the other side starts shutting down, and it's a complete disservice to the power of what Bitcoin has and what it can bring.
Yeah, I completely agree. But to be fair, I don't think there's any more just one camp of Bitcoin people. I mean, I'm looking now at a new type of Bitcoin zealots, which is the corporate Bitcoin zealots, which I would have never thought that they would exist. Like you have people like Michael Saylor that first buy, couple hundred, or I don't remember, like 50, $100 million of his own money in Bitcoin. Then he puts $450 million of his own company's money, the entire treasury. He just converts it to Bitcoin. Then he raises another 600 million in bonds. So he leverages this company's treasury and buys Bitcoin. And now today he posted that he bought another, I don't know how much, another 200 million at $23,000. And his first buy was at $11,000. That I would never have expected, because like this guy is not a hedge fund guy. He's not like speculating on it. It's like his company. He's like transforming his whole company. Now someone told me something else that's very cool, which is like, imagine like your company, like you know what happened with PayPal? It's like Square entered the space. They started making a lot of money from Bitcoin. Then PayPal was like, look, if we don't do something about it, we're just going to disappear. Or like a small a mutual fund that puts like a small allocation, like 1% of its wealth into Bitcoin. Then Bitcoin goes 20x. Then suddenly their 20% of their holdings are in Bitcoin. Now they have to decide what to do, and they get very excited. So I think there's many narratives. And 2020 taught me that the crypto Twitter is just a small part of the overall crypto market. But yeah, I wouldn't mind not hearing about rice stones and the gold standard in 2021. I don't think it would be missed.
Yeah, so I hear you on the corporate. I don't think they're corporate zealots necessarily. I mean, I think it's a gutsy move, right? It's a move that's counter all of the moves that his peers are making, and bravo, good for him, right? There's risk to it. Bitcoin's still in a place where it could potentially collapse. I mean, as much as you and I believe that it won't, it could, just like anything else could. And so I think it's a ballsy, gutsy, astute business move, but I haven't heard him post the same things that Elon Musk posts on Twitter about Bitcoin. Let's just say some of the memes that Elon posts are quite colorful, as you and I laughed about a few days ago. But it's not. I don't think that the mantra is beating the drums and saying Bitcoin or nothing and everything else, is burn down the house. He's living in the house. He's living in the financial house of today. And so there is a system, just like any system, it needs to change and it will evolve. But I don't think, to me right now, the parallel right now, I'm sure I'll get slack for this and I welcome this. And so if anybody disagrees, please come on our podcast and let's do this live and let's hash it out. But, there's a very famous business school case study about Southwest Airlines and how they succeeded because they've been able to standardize their planes. They have one plane model. They don't have to train the pilots on different planes. They don't have hubs. They just go point to point, so on and so forth. This is a tried and true case study. If anybody wants to learn more, DM us or look it up, Google it. It's pretty widespread. But the point is, Southwest is able to do this because there are other airlines that have to take people to I don't know, some small city in the middle of Idaho, and Southwest doesn't. If the whole system wasn't there, Southwest would not be able to be profitable, right? They're only profitable because they've innovated out of a current system that has to exist. So in that context, they're buying used planes. Someone has to buy them new. They only have one plane model, but that's because they don't have to fly to a small town. They don't need a small, 200 seater. So this is the same thing with Bitcoin. It's surviving and thriving now because there is this other old financial system that has to take care of the other, you know, um, end cases, so to speak, the other use cases for the average person that doesn't understand Bitcoin, that needs to just take money and spend money and so on and so forth. And while the system can slowly change over and should modernize, it's not like I just get really frustrated and people come out and say, Bitcoin, 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 the system sucks. Well, no, it doesn't. It's still keeping up 99.99% of the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we should reframe our whole idea of like how we think about Bitcoin as something that empowers humanity and like improves it's like an upgrade to the current
Yes.
monetary system. It's not like it has to destroy the previous one. It's like you slowly migrate to a new system. It's just like there's a really cool really cool picture that I really love, like Fifth Avenue in New York or something, and it's like 1905 versus 1911, and like you see like everything is horses and carriages, and there's like one car, and then everything is cars, and there's one horse and carriage.
Mhm.
So it's like I think centralized systems will still exist, and actually it's a healthy competition of like the centralized traditional system and the decentralized like new financial system, and we'll see who wins. I'm pretty sure I've been starting to think about Bitcoin just like the USA versus the USSR. They crushed the USSR, but not because the USSR was communist, because the USSR just wouldn't innovate. Like you look at communist China, and there's nothing inherent about communism that says like you can't succeed, at least like not collapse. I don't think China will overtake the US, but like the fact that the US exists didn't cause China to collapse, but it did cause the USSR to collapse. And it's just because the USSR weren't willing to change anything about what they're doing. So I'm really looking forward to 2021 as like upgrading our monetary system and improving it.
The other thing that I want to bring up is that 2020 has seen, because of COVID, has seen an acceleration of tech trends. So telemedicine, telework, working remotely, not coming in, huge innovation in medicine, which we have in pharmaceuticals, which we haven't seen, in ages. And, to his credit, Operation Warp Speed has done a lot of good. We produced a vaccine in under a year, which is completely unheard of. mRNA technology with Moderna and Pfizer, all these things. And even, for some people who can afford it, I know there's been a big kind of bifurcation between men and women. A lot of working mothers have been hit hard. Also, a lot of the less privileged folks and frontline workers have been hit hard. For the folks that are able to work from home, had a little bit of a breather. But it showed that tech trends that were happening, but happening slowly, are here to stay, especially this remote work and telemedicine. That I think should be the thesis for not only investing in 2021 and in the future, but also in kind of thinking through what other secondary and tertiary effects are they going to have? How will they improve people's lives? How will they shift the current value streams and value pools of the industries of 2019? Frankly,
Yeah, totally. I mean, we had an entire episode talking about that, but I think we just scratched the surface. It's almost like seriously, I heard somebody analyze the Airbnb IPO, and they said, "Oh yeah, they had to let all these people go. Then they spent $250 million in refunding travelers while still paying the hosts for like stuff that didn't happen. But in the long term, they figured out that without all this headcount, they're still as efficient. I mean, they're still as profitable. Or no, sorry, their revenue stayed the same, so their profitability increased." and like then they IPO'd and they got record valuations. So it's just very interesting, this tech trends that are again going against many things that we believed. We believed that like you can't fire people and then IPO. Like that sounds like a terrible idea. Like if I were to tell you when's the best time to fire people, just before you IPO. No, but yeah,
But actually,
COVID.
this is a very powerful example, especially with tech trends, about how we had a recording, I think 2 episodes ago, when we talked about the Nasdaq versus the S&P. And actually, we didn't talk about this, but during a crisis, the way to get out of a crisis, always, by the way, is to innovate out of that crisis.
Hmm.
And then innovation, right, goes to the Nasdaq. Actually, it reinforces our thesis. And I think we should tell our listeners that both of us put in a substantial amount, probably 30 to 50% of our retirement savings into the Nasdaq afterwards, because of we so firmly believe in the thesis. But this proves, right, our point. This proves the fact that in a crisis, everything is going to shit. Innovation, you always innovate out of a situation. Again, tech is going to drive us forward. Tech has driven us forward. Um, and actually, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, and we can talk about this, is, we talked about government intervention in our previous episode into tech companies. And since then, they went into Google. But if we didn't have Amazon, and we didn't have the Amazon scale that touched, went from Whole Foods all the way down to books or whatnot, all the way down to cloud services, we wouldn't be able to survive the pandemic in the same way that we have. Amazon, UPS, USPS, FedEx, in many ways, the logistics of this country, the technologically advanced logistics, kept us afloat. Walmart too. Walmart has a significant e-commerce presence, but without Amazon, without their ability to deliver boxes, right, and withstand the supply chain hit, the huge spike, we would be screwed.
Yeah, this gives me an idea. Instead of central bank digital currencies as a means to get money straight to the people's hands, I think they should just use Amazon to deliver the checks. It will be much more efficient.
That's a good point. Forget direct deposits. Give them to Bezos.
Give it all to Bezos fast, like give Bezos $1 trillion and tell him no. But yeah, you're right, and I want to link this to not only basically innovation, but necessity is the mother of all invention, in the sense that when the Russians sent the first man into space, it spurred the U.S. to send the first man to the moon, right? And so Moderna is a good example. Like, what if we suddenly, yeah, on the short term, very, very painful 2020, but what if we get like a new method of healing diseases from this innovation? What if China, with all their adversarial behavior, just like forces the US to get its shit together? And like, what I don't understand, when the government says, oh, we'll regulate, okay, you'll regulate it, but like, if you make a huge amount of your tax revenue from these companies, you don't want to destroy. In a sense, it's almost a goose that lays golden eggs for the government, right? Like, and also when people say, oh, they don't pay taxes, that's kind of bullshit. First of all, if Amazon doesn't pay taxes, it's because they reinvest all of their revenue, and so it's not profit. But like, all this reinvestment goes to salaries, goes to like purchasing things from other companies, and all of that goes to tax revenue for the government. So basically, I'm really not worried about regulation, because the US government is greedy, and they know that like they can't kill the goose that lays golden eggs.
We should have someone from the left one of these days in the show, because I agree with you. I'm horrified that, having come from the Soviet Union, I'm seeing here that billionaires are getting vilified. And look, every person can be good or bad. Billionaire, just like, somebody who doesn't make a lot of money. And the fact that there's income inequality in the U.S., it's true, it exists. But vilifying billionaires and saying like tax the rich and make them pay their fair share, I hate those. I hate those kind of terms because they're empty and they're so vague and generalist, and it's just so easy to say without having any two thoughts about what actual policy should be. And so I completely agree with you. You either reinvest money. I mean, look, the tax code has holes. Obviously, some people who are wealthy can pay a ton of accountants to get around and walk through all the loopholes, and the tax code should be completely fixed. But people make their money, and it's okay, and they use the laws of the land, and that's okay too. We have to be okay with that. Lobby your Congress people to get their shit together, stop fighting, fix the tax code. No party wants to fix it, right? So fix it, or just be okay with the code that exists, and be okay with billionaires taking the loopholes and finding the ways out. And does it suck? Yeah. Does it suck that Donald Trump pays less taxes than I do? Like a lot less? Like nothing? Yeah, it sucks a lot, right? But okay, well, then it's like you either be smart too, or change the game. But the changing the game is not complaining. Changing the game is proposing sane policies.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said like what is the actual policy they're proposing, because like it's one, first of all, these recent elections really showed that the extreme left lost. It lost big time, and I'm very happy about that. Also the extreme right lost. Like that's why I'm super happy with the results of the election, because like all of the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are not even getting like cabinet positions, and people are talking about like the ticket after 4 years that would be like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. Like that's pretty much as center as it gets. Like so I'm like, yeah, just propose policies. Also, what people don't understand is that you actually don't need a lot of money to eat and live, right? So what the wealthy used to do when the tax rate was like 92%, what they would do is they would have company jets, company cars, company corporate housing, and so all of those things are tax free, and like you withdraw a very small salary, so you don't get taxed a lot on your salary. You have a lot of equity in your company, and you leverage against it, you borrow against it, and then you don't pay taxes. So I think I shared this on Twitter, like the effective federal tax rate doesn't change much beyond like I think it's like 17 or 20% or something of GDP, and it's like really really hard to go above it even if you change the nominal percentage that you tax, because like what are you going to tell people, like we're going to tax you on your corporate jet? Like that's a significant change. Then like what do you decide where to tax, like it's been very clear. It's like we tax you on profits, we tax you on dividends, and we tax you on income.
You mean
So
what you're saying to our listeners? You're saying the total tax collected as a percentage of GDP hasn't changed.
federal tax collected as a percentage of GDP hasn't changed. And there's another interesting thing where if you look at states that have like 0% tax, like Florida and Texas, they actually collect a lot of taxes from other things, like they have natural resources, they have a bunch of stuff, they have sales taxes. So it's not easy. Like if AOC had an easy plan to tax the rich, she could have done it, but she knows it's not easy. I think she knows it. I think she just doesn't play dumb. I sometimes like she posts those things like she's like, oh, the bill includes 600 and something thousand or million to the military, but why couldn't we give this to other people? It's like, yeah, why couldn't we indeed? Like, go do something about it. Like, what are you complaining? Like, you're there, you're in Congress. Like, you
Well,
don't have the power to do it. Like, you don't have the votes.
well, we should do an episode on this. I mean, the tax stays the same. The mix of people who the tax burdens changes.
That
Shifts
is
from
true.
right. And is it correct to change to shift it from the wealthy to the backs of the non, but eh, or the other way, right? So anyway, we should have a whole conversation. This is going to go deeper, and we should actually have someone that's hardcore libertarian and hardcore or more left, I should say. Democratic socialist on the show together. Let's guide that conversation. I think it'll be actually very very interesting. But here are the lessons. Into going into 2021 is I think one of the things that we talked about at least for the foreseeable future, is it doesn't really matter if it's Biden or Trump. It doesn't matter what the tax rate and policy will be. The market will be hot for the next couple of years, regardless, and that's because of all the money we've printed, right? And a mega tax over all of us, and that we had to print. Another topic we should talk about is income inequality and what tech is going to do and what Bitcoin is going to do for inequality in general. Will it solve it? Will it exacerbate it? Will it do nothing for it? I think it's a good topic for us to discuss because it has massive implications on how, well, not only people's lives, of course, but this is a finance podcast. So, from a financial angle of, again, what's going to happen with industry, with companies, and with investments.
I just want to say, for people that say income inequality as if it's like an absolute bad, I just want to note one thing. There's a link between income inequality and social mobility. And the US is still one of the countries, one of the only countries in the world where you can have real social mobility, where you can come here as an illegal immigrant and start a business and become like a billionaire. Like, this doesn't happen in other places. Like, there was literally in the Dreamer Act, or what, those dreamers, there was like a VP in Goldman Sachs that was like an illegal immigrant. And this fills me with joy. I think immigration is fantastic. And I think this is one of our biggest strengths as a country, that, we attract people from all over the world. Like, you don't see Americans moving to China to relocate. They may move for a job or something, but they don't like, it's not like, it's pretty much a one directional move, or to Russia, right? You see many Russians come to America. And I think all the people that say income inequality, they don't understand that, like, it's okay to have inequality if it also creates mobility. And of course, if the bottom 10% or bottom 1% can live a decent life, and they can live a decent life. And I'm not saying that it's not, basically we should lobby for improving the condition of the bottom percentile, not for shrinking the gap. Like, I don't see any value to shrinking the gap between rich and poor. Like, when people say, oh, but it will create social unrest, is like, I'm sorry, but like, being poor also creates social unrest. And the fact is that people are less poor now than they were 50 years ago. So, and back then the inequality was less. So you
Income
can't really,
inequality, I mean, the
income inequality.
gap, yeah, because
Yeah, yeah, of
inequality in
course.
general was more.
No, we should have an equality in, everybody should be equal in the eyes of the law. Everybody should have equal opportunities. Everybody should have, like, equal access to good education, all of that. Yeah. But like, when people just say income inequality, like, who cares? Like, I don't understand.
Well, I think an important topic for next time. But as far as lessons, I think we have a lot. We have tech trends. We have expected, unexpected, challenge your assumptions. Think, zoom out, and understand that a tax is not a tax, or really that everything is a tax.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a suggestion to end the episode with a provocative, not a provocative, but an interesting question. So, what is one thing about 2021 that you think could surprise you in a way that completely changes the model which you have about the world? So, basically, uh, something that you believe deeply in currently. What could happen in 2021 realistically? Not something that, like, an asteroid hits the Earth, but something that could realistically happen that would completely change your model. And if you can't think of anything, I can tell you one thing about me.
Go ahead.
So I think that the Keynesian theory is wrong, but I could be proven right, because Keynes's whole thing. Sorry, I could be proven wrong, so it may be proven that it works. Keynes's whole thing said, when he said, let's print a bunch of money in the Depression, we'll stimulate the economy. And then people asked him, okay, you'll stimulate in the short term, but what will happen in the long term? And his reply was, in the long term, we're all dead. So then the Austrians say, see, he has an incomplete argument. He didn't have a good answer. But we have here so many resources in the US, just natural resources like oil and land and like all of these resources. What if all this money printing and keeping like rates at zero and all this free money allows you to do projects that wouldn't have been done otherwise, and it would have like no negative implication, because the only negative implication of that stuff is that people get diverted from valuable projects to invaluable projects. But this whole thing doesn't think about robots and about automation. So if you don't divert people from valuable projects to less valuable projects, and you print a bunch of money, which lets you build a bunch of robots, which extract a bunch of resources, and then you distribute these resources, maybe it could work. I still think it won't. But if this happens and we see like a lot of money printing and everything becoming better instead of becoming worse, then I would definitely be proven wrong. The stock market would go up anyway. So our investments would do well anyway. But it's just an interesting mental model that could be broken in 2021. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, well, look, it's fascinating. I haven't had a chance to think about it. We should talk about the role of inflation. That's another idea for an episode, and whether inflation could be good. I think for me, it's a little bit more kind of N+1, so to speak, less longer term, more short term. Is I'm betting a lot that the pandemic is going to be over next year, and if for some reason the virus mutates, and or the vaccines are proven to be not as safe or effective as they should be or as they seem to be, then everything goes out the window. I guess this is don't assume anything, and maybe I should heed my own advice and not necessarily assume. I think that's one of the biggest things. And the other is if all of a sudden these tech trends that we talked about, telemedicine, telework, instantaneously reverse. There'll be, I'm sure, a rush of people back to the offices because many people miss being at work with their colleagues. But my assumption is that we're not going to go back to the way things were in terms of commuting to work, commuting to the doctor's office, and essentially going to stores for 5 to 7 years. Maybe not ever. Maybe some of these things will fundamentally shift. And if all of a sudden we start coming back to the office next, people en masse next year, the end of next year, well, I'll be damned. I'll definitely be damned.
Wow, that's so interesting. I really hope you're wrong. I really hope that things get back to normal.
No, I hope things get back to normal. But just because things get back to normal, you don't necessarily need to go to the doctor when you can call a doctor on FaceTime or on some sort of HIPAA compliant app.
But what about the office?
I am
Everybody will be working
from home. I think it's been proven that people don't need to commute, don't need to flood the streets with cars that cause pollution. Don't need to look. For the first time in Venice, you have dolphins in the canals, right? During COVID.
Nice. Oh, that's great.
So I think that it was one way for the Earth to say, okay, guys, I need a breather. I need a freaking breather. And there you go. Here's a virus. Sit down. Give me a year. Let me catch up. Right? Let me catch my breath. And I think that we should just, if we can take some cars off the road, if we can take some people off public transportation, if we can do some work from home and not commute out of necessity, but commute out of the desire to collaborate, if we can figure out ways to collaborate cross-culturally, cross borders, without having to go visit and fly somewhere and spend, how much of your day did you spend commuting? People probably spend a third of a day, if not 25% of the day commuting. That's empty. That's a loss of life, right? You can be more productive, or you could be with your family. You could be outside doing, exercising, doing whatever. That, I think, does not need to come back.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to end this episode, and we will see what 2021 brings with it. Yeah, any closing words?
No, well, we're excited for 2021, and we should do an episode in person sometime soon. But until then, thanks for listening. This has been Mr. EBITDA, Alex Chizik at Mr. EBITDA.
And I'm Shimon Lazarov at Shimon Lazarov. Please leave us comments, ratings, reach out on Twitter, tell us what you want to hear about. We got some really interesting suggestions recently. And looking forward to hearing from you. And until then, I hope we all are well.
I hope we're all well too. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.